Welcome, I'm Mark Pedretti. I'm just going to be moderating this first session, which is really a discussion with the faculty. I'm counting on y'all in the audience to do a lot of the heavy lifting here. So if you have questions, please, just raise your hand. We'll weave them into the discussion. But let me introduce our faculty panel. Joining us today is Jason Siegel, who's Assistant Professor of Social Psychology and the Co-Director of the Institute of Prevention Science and Health Psychology. Patrick Mason, Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities and Professor of Religion. Michelle Bly, who's Associate Professor in the Division of Behavioral and Organizational Sciences. And Melissa Ziegler-Rogers, Assistant Professor of Politics and Policy. So welcome and thank you all for joining us. I suppose I will invoke the privilege of moderating this event by asking the first question, which is something like, if I'm a student in the audience, where am I? The transition out of coursework is a crucial moment in graduate students' career, but it's also one that, as Jacob just mentioned, brings a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity around the process. Now that the clear-cut structure of coursework is gone. So let's say I've just finished my coursework. What do I do first? What should my priorities be? And whoever wants to jump in, I see we've got one microphone to share, so.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Are they thinking you would need to use the mic?
I don't know if you can hear them in the back,
Yes.
then no.
They can hear me in New York. I think the first step, I would say, is sit with your research advisor. Talk to them. This is your first time, it's your first rodeo, it is certainly not theirs. They have worked with numerous students, with numerous learning styles, with numerous life challenges at that time. And even though everyone's situation is going to be different, a lot of us have seen a lot of different things. So give us the opportunity to advise you, to talk to you, to help you avoid the obstacles. A lot of the obstacles, you're all super bright, but a lot of them are not intuitive. If it was intuitive, we wouldn't need science. So please meet with us and allow us to guide you around the obstacles that we've seen other people make, because every student's different, every advisor is going to want different things, and if you try to guess, there's a good chance you're going to be wrong. If you meet with your advisor, there's a very good chance you're going to get the guidance that you're looking for.
Jason, you want to say a little more? What kind of obstacles do you have in mind there? I mean, what are some of the...
Well, there are life obstacles. A lot of times when people are done with coursework, people then try to start getting some income. So it's understandably. So it's not uncommon people finish coursework and they take on a 40-hour-a-week job. They move away. And, everyone has different takes on that. My take is that if you could avoid that, if you can stay put, you want to do so. I think it's very hard, at least personally in my experience, when a student moves away, to be able to mentor them. Just when you don't see someone at least every couple of weeks, it's hard to keep checking in. Then the student starts to feel a little bit on the outside, so they don't feel as comfortable writing to you and talking to you. Now, of course, there may be situations where you have to leave. Okay, but then you and your advisor can work that out together. It might be that you have to work a 40, 50-hour-a-week job. Ideal? No, but that's life sometimes. But sit with your advisor so they can talk to you and give you strategies, like every week setting aside 12 to 15, whatever the hours are going to be, before the rest of life jumps in. Because in my experience, if you take the approach, I'm going to work, I'm going to take care of my family, then try to find time to work on my dissertation, that time is rarely going to come.
I would echo everything that he just said and just add a couple of short things. So first of all, this touches on what Jacob just told us, that don't do it alone. So you have your mentor, you have your advisor, but hopefully you also have a cohort of other students that you've gone through the program who are also at a similar phase. Now, don't just advise each other. You do have an advisor for a reason. And sometimes grad students, if they are only listening to each other and giving themselves advice, they end up in strange places. So there needs to be sort of two conversations, one with your advisor, but then also that network of support that you have with your cohort, whether, especially at that stage of qualifying exams, there's no reason you can't study together, right? That's not cheating. To have study groups, to do those kinds of things. I've had students who Skype with, even if they do separate, or, one lives in Orange County, one lives in LA, it's hard to get together. And so they Skype together once a week. Just anything to sort of build in accountability for one another as friends and as colleagues and peers. The other thing I would say, so you have your advisor, you have your peers and your cohort, you also have university regulations. And I would check in with those. You should have a department handbook or a school handbook or something like that, which actually lays out the rules that you need to follow as you move towards qualifying exams and dissertations and things like that. Don't make it up. There are rules you have to follow, okay? And it's much easier if you know the rules ahead of time. Hopefully this happens in advising, right? But you're responsible yourself, right? I mean, we consider you adults. Hopefully you consider yourself adults, right? And so you are accountable and responsible for the rules that are laid out in those handbooks, even if your advisor didn't tell you, right? You're still responsible for those things. So check the handbook, work with your advisor, find a cohort of peers that you can lean on for support. Yep.
Is this on?
The switch right there.
Is this on?
Hello? Oh,
There.
yeah, that's better. Sorry. My voice doesn't carry quite as well as theirs does. So I think excellent advice. I would add maybe two other things that I think are really important at this stage. First is hopefully that along the way in your courses and in your discussions that you have found something that you're incredibly passionate about, something that you love, something that keeps you awake in the middle of the night, that you think about in the shower, that you love to talk to random strangers about. And that's something that you need to continue to foster and fuel. And so I think students that have found that passion and are able to think about ways that they can continue to develop that and nurture it do a lot better in this stage. I've had students tell me that they feel like the end of coursework is like driving off a cliff, that it feels like you just sail out into nothingness. And many of you, you're all bright and you've all been excellent students and you're really good at being students. And so when you drive off that cliff, you want to be students some more. And the problem is that you aren't students anymore, that you have made the transition to an apprentice scholar. And that's a great opportunity because it means that people like us don't get to tell you what you have to think about all the time. We don't have to give you assignments. We don't get to direct you. We don't get to tell you what to think and how to think it. You get to decide that. And I think that transition from I'm a receiver of knowledge to I am a creator of knowledge is all about finding that passion and finding your voice. And I sometimes have students that as we work through the dissertation, I'm like, yes, you're doing a great job of reviewing the literature, but what do you think? Like, where is your voice? Where's your passion? What do you think now that you've had all of these experiences, that we forced you to read all of these things? We've made you write about them. Now is your opportunity to say, this is what I think, this is what I want to contribute, and this is what I'm passionate about. And I think part and parcel with that is the second piece, which is now you have the opportunity to think about how to structure the way you nurture that passion. So for some of us, we get up early in the morning and we write, and that's perfect and golden and fantastic. Others of us, that doesn't work at all. We need 3 cups of coffee and we stare at the empty page and it doesn't work. And I've worked with students from all different kinds of, I think, approaches and tactics. So I think it's about finding what works for you, recognizing that this is fundamentally a deep creative process. And that means for most of us, it requires deep time. It means you can't work on your dissertation for 30 minutes on a bus very effectively, or 20 minutes waiting in line at the grocery store. You can look at articles that you wanted to read. You can think about new topics and ideas, but it's really about how do I structure really deep, meaningful time for me? And for some students, that's, Fridays are my day. I shut the door, I shut the email, I have someone take care of the children, whatever it is. For others of us, it's, 4 hours blocks, but finding ways that structure that deep time, I think, are really important. Jason Friedman has a TED Talk where he talks about the fact that the creative process is like sleep. You have to give it some time to get into those deeper levels. And I really think that that resonates with a lot of us, and particularly in today's modern society where there's always texts and tweets and instant messages and emails popping up. It's really difficult for you to find that deep, meaningful, creative time, and you've got to figure out a way to make it work for you given the constraints of your life situation. So those would be my 2 tips to add.
All right, I want to build upon what all 3 of my colleagues have said. So first of all, what you're in is this sort of crisis point in a way between where you're moving from critiquing to creating, right? And critiquing is in many ways easier, right? So you have, we can look at scholarship, even the best scholarship in our fields, and we can find something wrong with it, right? That's what we do in classes. And then when we get to this creative process, something I had as a realization in graduate school was like, all the stuff I was trashing was really good. And it was like, because you realize you have, how could I do something like that? You look at it through different eyes. And, so I would think of at least 2 things to think about that. One is you're not starting from a blank slate, right? So there are these things that you're passionate about that, and they might not occur to you immediately, right? But and getting to the process where you're thinking about a dissertation, go back through your classes, think about the things that were inspiring to you, how they might fit together, which of the ones that may seem most viable, talk to your advisor about that. And when you get to that point where you settle upon a topic, use us, right? And so a struggle I had in grad school is I felt like I had to essentially perform for my advisor, right? So that I had to walk into that person's office with, this epiphany that's going to shape the field, and that is absolutely paralyzing for your progress, right? So you have to treat us as humans, right? That have gone through this process and appreciate how you go through that process, right? And so doing that means that, I encourage my students to come in and say, I sort of want to do this, but I don't know what to do with this, right? And you can, I don't want you to do that for like 2 years, right? But you can do that a couple of times, and we can, and because we have more experience where we see, we have better scope of the field than you do, and you will one day, but it's just about experience, right? To see, if you're going to take this, these are some avenues you could take with this topic. Right, and so then you can go home and think, how would I like to address that? And really building on us as people who have the knowledge of where the holes are in the field, because once you start trying to create, it can be hard to see holes, right? It can be, well, they've figured out everything, right? Where can I contribute? But we can help you to figure out where you can contribute. Similarly with things like framing, right? So you may have the best tools, the best methods, right? And you have a really interesting topic, right? But a lot of how that topic is received depends on how it's framed within the literature, who you're citing, who you're relating to. That's really hard. That's something developed over time again, right? And it's something that, I've really seen as an assistant professor, I've seen my own skills at this, sort of exponentially increase in 5 years, right? And you can't be as good as that because you haven't had this experience at it, but we have it, right? And we can help you with that. Similarly, I have a lot of you, so the class period brought you structure, right? And you may have hated that structure, right? You may have found it to be sort of autocratic, right? I have to write this paper that I didn't want to write, right? And I'm using all this time in classes when I could be seeking out what my real passion is. But when it comes to trying to pursue your own passion, it's like, what do I do? Right? And so, I think you have to really become a master of self-maintenance. Something I think about, especially with the academic profession, is obviously it involves intelligence. You all have intelligence. Obviously it involves talent. We all have it. We all have talent. A lot of it depends on your ability to regulate your own behavior. And that involves, any given day, I can spend the whole day watching Netflix and going to Costco, right? Like, if I'm not teaching, that's what I could do with my time, technically, right? I don't have to be in an office all of the time, I'm not clocking in, clocking out. And that is obviously a wonderful freedom, right? I can go to a doctor's appointment when other people can't, right? But it's also an opportunity to slip in your progress, right? And so you need to create credible but essentially artificial constraints on your own time, right? You need to become your own, enforcer of managing your own progress, right? So that means, not going on to Netflix, not spending your time at Costco, or, knowing when you do that, you're sacrificing, that time needs to be made up, right? You need to treat it like a job, even though you have different expectations, external expectations from a job. So you need to figure out what that will be, right? Is it you wake up and you write in the morning in 4-hour blocks? Is it, you need 4 cups of coffee? You need to figure out that, and your advisor, again, can help you with this, right? So there's this super famous professor at Caltech in political science that shared an advisor with me. He was before my time, but what my advisor said is he couldn't manage himself, and so my advisor said he had to he had to write a page of text a day, sent to my advisor, and my advisor never read it, right? But it was just important that person have, constraints and expectations so that they did something every day. Right, and it could be that, right? You could set up a system like that with your advisor, or you could just you need to figure out what that would be, right? What if you need to block out times where you protect that time, right? Something I find is I have to need to go to a different location, right? So if I'm at home, I want to take a nap and eat snacks, right? So if I go to like the library or something for blocks of time, that you need to figure out ways to credibly commit your time to this pursuit, right? And that's going to be hard, and you're going to feel guilty, right? You're going to feel guilty when you're on weekends, right? When you're with your family and you're not progressing in your dissertation, and that never goes away. But you can figure out better ways to manage both yourself and also manage your expectations. And the better you do that, the more fulfilled you will feel, right? So if you have a good day, 4 hours of great progress, you will feel great. Right, and the more you can do that, the better you will feel. So it's a rewarding process, but I think it might be the most difficult part of this profession, and something to keep in mind about how you, knowing yourself, can maximize your own time.
Does anyone want to jump in on any of that? Yeah.
Hi, should I introduce myself?
Sure.
Okay, I'm Tamara Salibian. I'm a PhD candidate, past the falls. I'm writing my dissertation in media studies. My emphasis is reality television with a question of much larger issues that we won't get into. My question to you is, each of you kind of pointed to knowing ourselves and sort of the humanity aspect of it, like knowing your limitations and pushing through and this and that. My question is to flip it to the other side and how to navigate the human side of, for example, an advisor who maybe doesn't get back to you in time. That to me, going through this traumatic process of writing a dissertation is like, is it all crap what I just sent him and that kind of stuff? And what are some maybe specific examples of like how to connect and how to get there?
Yeah, or even how can students maximize their time with their advisees when we almost limited?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So when I was dissertating, when I was in that phase, I'd never done it before. I didn't know exactly what to expect. It turned out, and I had a great advisor. We got along great. I mean, we had a very productive relationship. But I went, while I was researching and writing my dissertation, I went about a year without hearing from him. And of course, I didn't know, are you supposed to hear from your advisor? I don't know, right? It turned out that was the worst year of his life. I mean, he was in the middle of a divorce. He was handling literally like international crises at work. And so I wasn't like at the top of his list, right? But I had to keep going, right? And so I just went to work every day, right? And I kept writing and kept researching and kept doing it. Now, was this ideal? Was this optimal? No. And I will say he came in at the end, you know, when I finally sent him, you know, kind of a full draft, and he spent like literally he set aside an entire day with me, and we went on the whiteboard and stuff like that. So he was amazing. He came in and he's been a great mentor ever since. But that was the human side of it, right? I just happened to catch him in the worst year of his life, right? It wasn't his fault, it wasn't my fault. It was just the human part of it. I mean, I feel guilty sometimes as an advisor, especially having, you know, as I've taken on various administrative responsibilities here at the university. Sometimes I will go weeks, 2 or 3 months before I'll get back, not to an email so much, but to a chapter that a student has submitted to me. And I feel guilty about this. I feel horrible about this. I may have 1 or 2 students out here that I owe you a chapter. But you can't stop because your advisor doesn't get back to you, right? You're well within your rights to send a follow-up email, right? Say, I haven't heard back, you know, just making sure you got it, and you know. But you do have to take into account they're busy people. Now, if somebody just drops off the map, right? I mean, you know, you do have other recourses, department chairs and so forth, if you feel that there's something really irresponsible happening. But this is a relationship you've sort of got to navigate and recognize that, I mean, one of the good things here about CGU is that we're graduate faculty and we're dedicated to you, right? And so professionally, we do have a somewhat fewer, you know, we're not reading undergraduate theses and other things like that. But still, we're busy people. So it's a negotiation.
A couple of things. One is this process that you're going to go through or are already going through is a crisis of confidence for you too. It will be. The field really tests your confidence, and I think that in my experience that manifests itself in I haven't heard from them, and so my work must be terrible, right? And you know, just from the faculty perspective, you know, part of what Patrick was suggesting is we're probably not thinking that. And we're probably not thinking that because we're working on other stuff. And so, you know, we haven't looked at it. We don't know, it could be terrible, right? But it probably isn't, right? But we just haven't gotten to it, right? Because we have these other administrative constraints. We have our own career constraints that we're trying to address. And generally speaking, we understand what this process looks like, right? So we're not expecting, you know, Graham Allison's dissertation on the first ride, right? So we know that there's going to be variance in quality, right? And if you submit something to us that's not perfect or not even, you know, what you think is your best work, we're not going to look at you that you're stupid, right? We understand it's a process, right? And so you should I would really encourage you to give us stuff, especially if you're stuck, rather than sit on it and worry that you're not worthy, right? You're worthy, right? And the other thing is to think is that we don't have enough time to sit around and think how you're not good at your work, right? It's not higher on our priority. It's not what, and you know, a way to think about it is like, we don't have time to think about that stuff. And so we're not thinking that way. But I thought that my advisor was thinking that, right? The reason I express it is because that's how I felt, right? And I really encourage you to think of us as, in a sense, human, of that we're not mad at you, we don't think you're stupid, we're busy, right? And we want to help you. We feel guilty when we don't respond, right? So think of us as just, you know, busy people trying to help you. And you know, if we don't respond, email us again, right? We're not going to be mad. I thought that too, right? That if they haven't responded and I would be hesitant to email them because then they'll be mad. I'm always like, thank you for emailing me. It got out of my radar, right? But I'll get to that. And I usually when that sort of email comes back, I get to that within a day, right? That I just needed prompting. And that can be actually helpful for us, and it can alleviate some of our guilt because we can actually act quickly.
I would also just add, so I come from the organizational behavior and leadership area, and I would look at this as a mentorship relationship, and that we have a lot of research and evidence on what predicts a positive mentoring relationship. One factor is communication of expectations, and that doesn't just come from the mentor, it comes from the interaction between the mentor and the mentee. So clarifying, what are the expectations of your mentor, of you, and what would you also expect of your mentor? And we have a lot of evidence that if mentor relationships have those kind of clarifying communication opportunities up front, it can transform a relationship into a much more positive one. So, when I sit down and I agree to be someone's mentor, we have those kinds of talks, and I clarify, look, in DBOS, we have an expectation that you get feedback within 2 weeks. I will let you know, if it's the end of the semester or the holiday, it may not be 2 weeks in that particular case, but I will always let you know what you can expect from me. And you are then, you have a right as my mentee to say, hey, Michelle, you said 2 weeks, and I haven't heard, I heard crickets when I sent you my last proposal. So you have then the right to follow up with me and call me on that expectation. So it's a relationship. And the other thing we know from the mentoring literature is that the diversity of mentoring relationships is also very important. So I think one thing that can help you is to have a network of mentors. So not just your research advisor, but other people either at CGU or in the field. Your peers are also a part of that network of mentoring, so you can have advanced students in that. So really building a network of mentors rather than just one mentor. And that can help if your mentor does go through the worst year of their lives and you need to be making progress. We know from the derailment literature that over-reliance on a single mentor is a big predictor of derailment in a career. So I would think about, how you can build those relationships with other people in the profession, other people in your peer network, advanced students, other faculty at CGU, so that you have feedback possibilities from more than just your research advisor. And then I just want to also quickly pick up on something important that Patrick said. Now that I've moved more into administration and I've been associate dean and things like this, it is important to know that you have rights as students, that sometimes there's this power differential between professors and students that can be unfortunate and you can lose in that power differential. So know that you have options. If you're being bullied, if you're being abused, if your mentor is not treating you correctly, the department chair, the dean, the student services resources are there for you, and you need to know that you have rights, because I think, fortunately it doesn't happen often, but it can happen that students do get less than professional treatment in these kinds of situations. And so know that you have recourse and people to talk to if you feel that you've been unfairly treated.
Try to use this. And just to add, I think a key thing that I always ask my advisees is don't overanalyze. In other words, I had a student who was upset because when I sent emails, I normally would put their name first and then another student, but one day I flipped it. And they assumed I was angry with them or upset at them. I don't know why, or, well, I saw you on campus and I waved and you waved back, but then right away you were thinking about something else. Yeah, I was thinking about 80,000 papers.
I've had colleagues say the same thing.
So I guess what I always ask, because I feel really bad when a student feels that way. So, I mean, especially just, I'm from the East Coast and we're very explicit. So I always tell my students, I don't give implicit messages. If you think I'm sending you an implicit message, you're thinking the wrong way. So just please don't assume. If you think we're upset with you, ask us. Because 99% of the time, as my colleagues are saying, it's not that we're sitting back thinking how bad your work is for the past 3 weeks. It's normally the worst year of our lives. The papers are due. So we want you to be happy and not focused on something that's not there. So don't make assumptions, and if you're uncertain, ask us and let us clarify that for you, and I think that will save a lot of rumination and possible heartache.
I think also that process of like, they think it's crap or they hate us or whatever is also a distraction. And it's become a distraction that I use, just like I use Facebook, and not done right. So, yeah, thank you, all of you.
Yeah, if I can actually follow up, Jason, on something that you said. Yeah, in the earlier you mentioned, you know, that you actually like to sort of be in touch with your advisees every couple of weeks, and yet I'm hearing also that a lot of time management. I mean, how do you do that? How do you sort of maintain that? Is it just even checking in on email? Is that like enough, or are you really, you know, sort of seeing people face to face? I don't know if that's you see what I'm saying. It's like we're both saying like don't take it personally if you don't see people too often, but you're saying see people quite often. So.
Well, I think there's a lot of variation in the advisor-advisee relationship. A lot of us have different numbers of advisees. Some of us, just like different managers, like to be more hands-on. Some of us like to be more hands-off. I try to figure out what's best for the students. Some of my students want more structure, some of them want less, and I think in a lot of ways Michelle's advice is just dead on target, that if you could sit with your advisor and come up with the expectations and really let them know what you need. Just like there are different learning styles with different students, there are different mentorship styles. So I think the more you could communicate about what works best for you, and maybe, you know, I can't, you know, talk to you on the phone for 3 hours a day. But if you have that back and forth in communication, I think that will help to keep you grounded and know what the expectations are.
Does anyone want to jump in? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to ask, is that relationship personal or pure business? And by that I mean, if you have to drop your mentor, how do you handle the fallout?
I think it's primarily a professional relationship. And it's something that I actually think about a lot. One of the great things about working with graduate students is that you are much more my peer than when I was teaching undergraduate students. I mean, that was very clear, right? I wasn't their buddy, you know, I mean, you know, things like that. Graduate students, you're more my intellectual peer. Oftentimes, age-wise, we could be peers. I mean, you know, I have some of my students who have kids in the same elementary school as me, so I see them at drop-off, right? So I mean, so we're actually, socially, we're in a kind of similar peer group, but then we have this professional relationship as well. So it can get a little fuzzy on some of that stuff, but it's primarily a professional relationship. And if you need to change advisors midstream, you should have an honest conversation with them about why you want to do that. And I can almost guarantee you, I can't speak universally, but we all have a lot of advisees. Like, I'm not going to like spend a lot of time crying in my pillow at night if somebody comes to me and says, you know, Patrick, I mean, you know, thanks for all you've done, but I really think I'd work better with this other faculty member, right? And I'd say, great, you know, I mean, and so I'm not going to take that personal, especially if you don't. I mean, if you come in and say nasty things to me, right? I mean, that's different. But if it's purely professional, I did this. I switched advisors midway through graduate school. I came in to work with one scholar, and then found this other one who then abandoned me for a year. But I switched midstream and kept the other one on my committee, and that was fine. It was actually the perfect thing for me to do. He didn't feel bad about it. It wasn't a personal attack on him. It just worked out better for my intellectual interests, which evolved over time. And so we hope to see that kind of growth, and sometimes that means that you change advisors midstream.
Yeah, I would just add, yes, it's fundamentally a professional mentorship-mentee relationship, and I think that applies for both students and faculty. So these are roles, and they're clearly defined, and we have institutional and professional boundaries around, you know, what's acceptable in those roles. And I think that it's, you know, following up on what Patrick was saying, I think it's, I always communicate to my students that this relationship needs to be beneficial for both parties. And a mentorship relationship should be, that the mentor and the mentee are both benefiting and they have enough overlapping interests and work styles that they can make that work. And if it doesn't, then as in every other professional relationship, it is beneficial for both parties to end that relationship and move on. And so I always tell students, if you are not getting what you need from me, we either need to, transfer advisors, add another person to the committee, perhaps we need to bring in someone else. I'm not offended, I want what's best for you, and as Patrick said, I won't be up crying at night that it didn't work. I have lots of great mentor-mentee relationships, and I've also had ones that have failed. And when I was in the first year of my program, I actually had a mentor who asked me to do something that was completely unreasonable, and I had to go to the department chair and say, look, I don't think this is reasonable, and I was in tears and distraught, and I thought my career was over. And it wasn't. I was reassigned. I got a much better mentor and someone that had much closer interests aligned with myself. And so I look at that not as a failed relationship, but as a relationship that wasn't beneficial for both parties. So I think, I share that story and because it's natural that it's not always going to work. And you can either supplement that through, finding mentors to supplement exchange expertise, or you can switch mentors, and that's okay. It happens, on a fairly regular basis, I would say, especially as students when you may enter a program with certain interests and then completely, decide that your passion is in another direction. And that's great, that's okay. I tell students I would rather you follow your passion than keep, torturing yourself with a proposal that you did that you don't care about anymore. And, maybe it's in leadership and you think, oh, Michelle wants me to study leadership for the rest of my life and I'm going to let her down. No, I want you to study where you are going to make your contribution. And sometimes that changes, just like in life, our paths change. So.
There's another question, yeah.
Can I just add
please.
one quick thing that's probably not all that important? Assuming it is a situation where it is a change of interest or something in the realm of normality, try to be respectful to the mentor and sit down and have that conversation with them. I think it's like any other relationship. Don't text them in the middle of the night and say, I want a new advisor, see you later. Yes, don't break up with them, don't leave a voicemail. Just give us, I guess, the respect to come and sit down with us. I think everything that everyone has said is, sleep won't be lost. We will probably understand. We probably also know that things aren't working perfectly. But I think it's important just to be respectful and to avoid it being a negative situation, to have that sit-down, honest conversation with them, as long as you're comfortable doing so. There are situations outside the realm when you're not, and then yes, certainly go to the chair or someone else, but make it a respectful breakup.
So hi, I'm Melissa Navarro, and I'm a Joint Doc student in the School of Educational Studies at San Diego State. So I have a question that I haven't asked yet, and every time I bring this up to a mentor, it's like, oh, you have a good problem, but I have no solution to the good problem I have. So the question is, how do you select the research question? The reason why I'm asking this is because I feel like I have a nice toolkit of methodologies, different things that I can apply. And so in selecting and narrowing down my research question, I have my topic, but do I want to show off my tools? Like, oh, I'm going to do this regression or this multi-level modeling, or do I base it more on answering a question which might not show off my skills? And I know I'm not trying to save the world in one dissertation, but how do you approach that research question that's going to be the question? If that makes sense.
There we go. I realized holding the mic was a really bad idea.
This is something I'm going to be touching on this
Yeah, I don't
afternoon.
need to keep going first.
But
So first of all, I would highly recommend the book The Craft of Research by Wayne Booth and others,
yes.
which will lead you in that process from interest to topic to research question. And then through the research process, I would highly recommend that to every student at every stage. And I just went through it with my students again for a class last semester, and I was reminded or learned new things. I mean, it's the kind of a standby reference work for exactly this kind of thing. But then I think for your particular question, this is where a mentorship really matters. I mean, you need to think about what you want to get out of your dissertation and where you're heading in your career. Because dissertations can actually do various kinds of things, depending on what you want them to do. And a lot of it depends on the kind of career that you want. Do you want a tenure track academic position, or do you want to teach, right? And you're getting the PhD to qualify you to teach in various things, or maybe you want to do something else, go into the policy world, or something like that. So I don't think there's one answer to your question, because depending on what you want to get out of the dissertation, you might want to show off skills, versus you might want to make an impact in a certain set of, in a field, right? And that's going to be different depending on what you want.
Yeah, I would just add, I remember my advisor telling me, you know, your dissertation is not everything. You want to develop a plate. You want to have your meat, your potatoes, and your side. He was obviously not a vegetarian. And I think there's some wisdom to that in the sense that today's world, you really need to think about multiple kinds of outcomes for your dissertation, and one is, you know, what is the theoretical contribution, or what is the, you know, I really want to make the world a better place kind of question. A second might be, wow, I'm really developing, advanced skills in multi-level modeling, and so maybe I'd like to write a paper just on, you know, the application of multi-level modeling in this particular domain. And maybe there's a salad, which is maybe I would like to talk about, you know, some practical implications of this. Or, you know, it could be a lot of different ways that you configure that metaphorical plate. But I think the fundamental idea is that when you're sitting in your chair, you tend to believe that the dissertation is your life's work, your opus, your, you know, the end-all be-all of life. And I can tell you that in most cases it's not. It is, hopefully a very fantastic project that makes a contribution to the world, but it's also an apprenticeship, that you're learning the processes of doing research and developing research questions, and that doesn't mean that that research question has to be the only best one you ever have in your life. And I think that having that expectation can be paralyzing to students, because they go, I can't. It's not going to change the world in one project. And from my perspective as a mentor, I think that's okay, because it's probably going to be the first step in a lot of projects that you do in life, and hopefully it is a fantastic, meaningful contribution. But it's also the first step in your career in many ways. And so in that, if you look at it from that perspective, it doesn't have to be the most meaningful research project that you've ever done. And I think that taking away that pressure helps students be a little bit more playful with the research question. And I always say, have a file drawer of other research questions. It's like, if in 5 years and, some time, I would love to look at that or that or that. Because your dissertation cannot, for most of us, encapsulate everything that you're interested in or everything that you can do in your case. It can't be, change the world, show off my multi-level modeling, and, be practically relevant as well for most of us.
Very similar vein. I would ask the question that you're most passionate about for your dissertation, because it's years. It's years on this question, right? And you might not have years worth of interest in multi-level modeling. That I would do that for the dissertation. And as my colleagues have said, there are other ways, other venues to show off skills, right? So you can. First of all, within the dissertation, right? The dissertation is multiple chapters, right? And I actually encourage dissertations that try to approach the same question with different types of tools, right? So deep theoretical tools, qualitative methodology, quantitative methodology, right? The other way is to write a dissertation about, the thing that you're really passionate about, and then write co-author research where you do a multi-level model with, a faculty member or by yourself or whatever it is. It's about diversifying your portfolio. And often, at least in my field, you need publications to get an academic job before you're out of grad school. And it's really hard to get those publications from your dissertation before you're out of grad school. So what that implies is that you're writing papers outside of your dissertation during your grad school dissertation process, that's a great place to demonstrate those skills in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're pointing to is that it's not just a one meal, right? It's kind of a whole refrigerator. You're setting an agenda of projects, right? The kind of a horizon for you to think about long past your dissertation. Anything else from the gallery? Other questions? Yes, sir.
How do you help your students push past imposter syndrome?
How do we get over it?
Or the fear of rejection, or how to build a thick skin when your paper gets rejected for the third time, or your pilot study doesn't get funded further because of something else, whatever.
My only advice on that is, I guess I have a few pieces. One is, it gets better situation, right? So this is I get rejected all the time. I don't enjoy any of those rejections. But I've been getting rejected for years. And in the beginning, sort of when I was in graduate school and I would get rejected on a journal article, the mourning period would be at least a week, probably 2 weeks of just, I can't do this, what am I doing here? What am I doing? I should get a job, right? That sort of stuff. Now it depends, right? So if I have an article that I just know is really good and it deserves to be out there, right? We've thought about this a lot. Then the mourning period will still be a day or two. But sometimes I get rejections and I'm like, right? And that didn't come from some sort of, it's not from meditation or yoga or anything like that. Some of it, that could help you, right? I'm not saying, for me, that's not where it came from. But if that helps you, do that. A lot of it is just that understanding that it's like imposter syndrome in general, that most people have imposter syndrome, and so recognizing that most people feel this way can help you to realize that everyone else is feeling this way, and that if you talk to people about your rejection, right? So if you go to academic conferences and people will start complaining about all of the times they've been rejected, and it helps you to realize, oh, you're being rejected, just like me. And you do get the scope of experience over time, so that helps you develop the thick skin. And some of it is just being easier on yourself, right? Of just recognizing, most of the time, especially earlier in your career, right? So why would you expect yourself to hit home runs in the beginning, right? That's not how any sort of skillful profession works. Right? Any skillful profession works in trial and error and developing skill over time. And so give yourself a break, right? That you will get better over time. And if you give yourself the chance, you will see that, right? And finding other things in your life that can make you feel successful. And that can be yoga, right? But it could be your family life, right? It could be volunteering. It could be something, in your civic community or your church or something where you're feeling really fulfilled at times when you are not feeling fulfilled in your professional life can really help to balance those things. Because this is a very up and down profession. There's a lot of rejection, and this is part of my earlier point about managing your own time is we have very little success in this profession. And by that I mean, when you have a regular job, right, you have this presentation, right, or you have, this deliverable every week, right, you send out this product, right, you have this successful meeting. We don't have a lot of that, right? We have these projects that go on for years, literally years, papers that go on for years, and each day can feel like you didn't do anything. Right, so you have to figure out those little successes so that you set the goal of I'm gonna finish the methodology section of this paper. Right, what I can do today is write this segment of this paper, and I finish that. I feel great, right? To make yourself feel great over those types of things. But just being easy on yourself, because you're going to feel this way. It's going to happen, you're going to be rejected, but there are successes there, but you have to stick with it, I would say.
Yeah, I love the fact that we actually talk about imposter syndrome now as a common parlance in dialogue, because I think it's really important to normalize rejection and to normalize the sense that most people as human beings feel inadequate to the challenges they face sometimes on a daily basis. And so I think normalizing rejection and sharing it. I remember Kathy Pezdek is a full professor in DBOS, and when I first started as an assistant, she said, let's share our rejection letters. And I thought, what a great idea, because we would then normalize, discuss, and joke about, wow, they really missed the point here, and it really helped to have that social support and to normalize the fact that rejection happens to all of us, and that's how we get better. I would also say you should also recognize that not all rejection is the same. I mean, there is rejection which is about fit, that is much less about what your work has to say or the quality of it than this isn't just the right fit for this journal, this conference, this book, fill in the blank. So I think recognizing that there is rejection that is about fit, rejection that is actually very helpful and developmental, and once you get over that initial, oh, I can't believe they didn't understand my brilliant ideas, you can see, wow, there's really some validity in this critique that will make my work better, and that's an important stage. And then there's also, I think, rejection which is, I think, relatively, I would say, unfounded, meaning that you go, you know what, I don't think these people get what I'm trying to do. And if we study creativity, we know that the domain has to be ready for the idea. And sometimes people just aren't ready to hear what you have to say. And in that, I think that's the hardest form of rejection, because it requires that perseverance to say, I believe in this idea, I believe in this project, I believe it's a contribution, and I've got to continue to push for finding a way to have it be accepted. But I think recognizing that there are those different kinds of rejection and using social support to deal with rejection, and also recognizing that the creative process in and of itself is predicated on the notion of a continual rejection, improvement, until a work is accepted. And so once you kind of realize that that's a normal part of the process, that's what you signed up for, I think it helps in making external attributions rather than internal attributions, which is, I'm terrible, my work sucks, I should just quit and go home and, pack up my bag. So it helps to make those external attributions and look for help and social support. How have other people dealt with this kind of rejection? I remember one of my doctoral seminars, the professor, Jerry Newman, brought in a stack of papers this high, and he said, this was my most important paper in my career, and this is all of the levels and times it was rejected and edited and rejected and resubmitted. And I still remember that, even though it was 20-some years ago, because it normalized the rejection process for me, and it showed me that an idea that I knew him for being famous for had gone through this same process. And so I remind myself, okay, good ideas often, that stack could go, very, very high before your idea is actually accepted.
Yeah, I think it's great that we talk about this now. I mean, I was literally having this conversation last night at dinner with one of my colleagues. I mean, so this was, by all outward appearances, I have a very successful career. I'm a tenured professor. I have an endowed chair. I'm now dean. All these kinds of markers of success. And I was having dinner last night with another extremely successful colleague. She's the editor of the leading journal in our field. And we were having this, and we were both talking about imposter syndrome, and we chalked it up to the fact that she's the youngest of 4 children. I'm the third of 4 boys. There wasn't a lot of affirmation going on in my house growing up. So we always had this kind of inferiority complex that we still carry with us, even though we have had very successful careers in many ways. I mean, and it's at every stage. I mean, I just moved offices and was going through stuff that I should have thrown out a long time ago, but hadn't. And I had a folder of things of all my graduate school rejections. And at the time I got them, and I plastered them on the wall of my apartment, and I called it the Wailing Wall. And I got rejected to far more programs than I actually got admitted into one program that was the school I was at is a bit of a safety school, but then I only got admitted to one other program on the wait list, It turned out to be the perfect program for me, and it launched me onto a very successful career, right? So rather than dwelling on the 8 other schools that I didn't get into, I mean, things worked out. For me, the other thing was my dissertation. When I finished my dissertation, I presented on it at a national conference, and an editor of the press that I had my eye on for this book. I mean, for me, it was the perfect press. They did exactly what I wanted. This would fit perfectly within their series. And she was there in the audience, and she came up and asked me, to submit my dissertation. And I knew, because so many people have told me, like, a dissertation is not a book. A dissertation is not a book. Do not submit an unrevised dissertation to a press. So I'd heard this over and over. But this editor said such nice things and flattering things about my work. And I said, oh, I haven't revised it. She said, oh, I'm sure it's fine. So I submitted it to the perfect press. And she had all these nice things to say. I mean, it was great. And she sent it out for review, and one of the reviews came back was good. The other was the most devastating thing I've read in my life. And speaking of breaking up with people by text, I mean, this editor dropped me like a rock. Like all these great, cultivating, nurturing conversations. I mean, she just dropped me like a rock. I mean, it was devastating to me, because this was the perfect press for me. And I sort of set it aside. I mean, it was first-year career, so I had other things to do. But I sort of set this aside for a year, and then came back to it, rolled up my sleeves, got back to work, made it better, wanted to respond to that negative review, right? So I'll show him. And went back and addressed it, and actually ended up publishing it with arguably a better press. So learning from our rejections is a really important part of it. The last thing I'll say is I'm a baseball fan. In baseball, as a batter, if you fail 70% of the time, you're going to be an all-star. So I feel a lot the same way, right? That you can focus on the 70% of the time that you fail, or the 30% of the time that you succeed, and it makes you an all-star.
Just a couple of small things to add. I fully agree. I've learned a ton from the rejections. And even if it's, well, this is an unfounded comment, I'll then sit back and say, okay, but what did I not write in the correct way to avoid that unfounded comment? So there's a lot that can be learned through that. Also, I find that a great cure for the anger about a rejection is getting it out again. That for some reason, once I get it out again, whether it's after changes or just popping it out, a lot of that goes away because it's back under review. As far as imposter syndrome, I think we all have it. What I try to do is I try to imagine if someone came over to me and said, this is what my life is like. And I sort of do the self-distancing technique. And I think, sure, when I think about my life, no, I should be doing better, I'm not doing good enough, da-da-da-da-da. But then if a good friend came to me and described my life, I'd be like, dude, your life's good, what are you complaining about? So the self-distancing, and because we all judge ourselves very harshly, but how would you judge someone that you care about if they had your exact situation? And that sometimes helps me.
I think we can have this view of our academic career sort of like the American dream, right? Where we are these individuals that are pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, and we're doing everything to show the field our vast knowledge, right? And it's just us, and we hang on our ideas, and so then we're rejected, we're nothing, right? And what I would encourage you to understand, something that, because I sort of took a lot of those things personally, is that most successful careers are actually not this just you showing the world, right, your ideas. The careers are, getting advice from your mentors, collaborating with your colleagues, working with senior colleagues to publish, right? And you learn a lot from them, right? It's making connections in the field, it's networking, right? It's presenting here, it's luck. And all of those things are kind of a messy process. It's rejecting, fixing. None of it's this satisfying, like Disney movie of perseverance, of like I did this all by myself, and I fought the tide, right? It's much more complicated and much more integrated than that. The other thing is the 3 types of rejections that Michelle talked about. You have to be able to figure out which one of those things those are, right? Because if you react to everything as that's unfounded, right, and don't take the time to, I think you should get the rejection. I don't even read the comments for a day or two, but if you get when you read them, allow yourself to be mad, right? And then, and a couple of days after that, look at them humbly and say, what can I do to make this better? Because, I can promise you, your work is not perfect, right? None of our work is perfect. And sometimes we have a tendency to say, well, they just didn't get it, right? And as Jason said, why didn't they get it, right? So that can be on you in part. Sometimes you're gonna get those reviews that are ridiculous, right? And oftentimes they'll be short and they'll be dismissive, and there's not a lot you can do about that. But the ones where they take time and they really, critique your work, you should take this seriously, right? So even if you think their critique's unfounded, you should figure out a way to make sure you don't get that critique in the future, right? Work to address that question. It's, I can almost promise you too is that, if you did really well in your classes and you have a paper that you have papers that you wrote that you got A+ on, and you're like, oh, those are ready for a journal. At least in my field, they're probably not, right? And that's nothing about you, right? But it's about most of our work takes years of advancement, to be able to publish that work. And so that's a great start, right? But but if you expect to, take your class paper and submit it to the top journal and get it published, it's maybe once in a while that will happen, but most of the time it will not. And because I've done this, right? I was like, oh, this is a good paper, right? And I sent it to a top journal, it got trashed, right? And then it went on to be published down the road, right? But you have to understand, that who you're competing with, where people have a lot of experience and have been in this field a long time and have more resources than you do. But also that rejection helps you, right? That being trashed helped me in the long run to figure out what the standard is for publication, right? It was a lot higher than I knew, right? And I just had to be able to meet that expectation over time.
I come from a family of academics, and in conversation with some of my older family members about my dissertation, they've raised the question of, well, that approach is outdated. For example, Christopher Lasch, everyone trashed him, and is that who you want to hinge some of your argument on? Random example. How much importance should we be thinking about placing on how our research fits into what is trending in forms of approach, or what has fallen out of favor? Because on the one hand, we want to pick something that we're passionate about, an approach that's going to take maybe years, but at the same time, it doesn't want to be so out of the realm of what's being discussed that they're like, who's this chick? What is she doing?
So I'll take a stab at that. I don't have, I won't say I have all the answers, but I draw on Mike Csikszentmihalyi's work a lot in creativity and the importance of the domain, and the recognition that your dissertation is subject to the gatekeepers of the discipline. And so I think that's the most important consideration, is that if it's too, traditional and old, the gatekeepers are likely to say, oh, we saw that in, 1952, and what's actually new here? If it's too trendy and outside of the grounding of the discipline, you will get the opposite, which is, this doesn't resonate with the, what we have built in this domain, and it doesn't advance it moving forward. So that's, in part the reason for, advanced graduate education is understanding that domain and understanding who the gatekeepers are, and understanding that no knowledge exists in a vacuum, that it has to be vetted by other scholars or gatekeepers in that domain. And so if your family of academics are well versed in the domain, that might be excellent advice. If they're not, if they're in a different domain, it might be less relevant for you in terms of your dissertation topic. But I think we would be remiss to say, the most brilliant idea in the world is going to be accepted by everyone. Part of academic scholarship is about that, that slow, steady advancement of knowledge and the gatekeepers have the experience to know, what the domain looks like and what the discipline has already accomplished, and ultimately we trust that they have some experience or curation to be able to say, look, this is too traditional and doesn't add, or this is too trendy and doesn't add. So I think it's in some ways it's a great question, because it is a negotiation with what's been done. And it's also a translation of, if something is trendy, how does that relate to the existing long-standing traditions within the field? And sometimes new knowledge comes by making that relationship explicit, or reframing a question in a new way that may resonate in 2017 in a way that it might not have in 1917. But that would be my first initial stab.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom there. I'd say that the academic research and fields are a lot like fashion, like that they go through cycles, and like who was ever going to wear bell bottoms again? For 20 years it was crazy, and then all of a sudden everybody's wearing bell bottoms, right? And then nobody is, and so it works the same way. Or in similar ways in many academic fields as well. What was once old becomes new again as people bring fresh eyes, new theories, other kinds of things, and actually can revisit it. I mean, in my fields, in the few years just before I got to graduate school, like nobody was doing political history. Like yawn. Like who does political history? So lame and outdated. But then right as I was there was this kind of new generation of like the new political history, right? It wasn't the old way, but it was a new way. So if they'd done it the old way, it would have been passé, and they wouldn't have been leaders in the field. But they found ways to do it in a new way. Same thing in New Testament studies. I mean, the New Testament, you can either study the Synoptics, John, or Paul. That's it, right? And so they go through a cycle. Like everybody's doing the Synoptics, everybody's doing John. So everybody's been doing Paul for a while. Now they're going to do John. I mean, and so it takes a few years, but you can't just do what's old. You have to think, what am I bringing that's fresh, even as we go through these cycles.
Yeah, just to follow up on this, what if you want to advocate a paradigm shift in your discipline? And that could happen in any. So because academic disciplines are very specialized, and you want to take an interdisciplinary approach that may be different and that has become the tradition within that academic discipline. As long as your advisor and key players are okay with that, they're the gatekeepers for you relative to your dissertation. What's to keep you from doing that? I'm just posing that question, putting it back on the table. Because if you feel strongly enough that maybe your academic discipline needs something that has certain blinders based on their presuppositions that they've been working the discipline with, and you feel that you're bringing something new to the table that is significant, why not bring it to the table? Go ahead.
I think a key thing is to go into that with your eyes wide open about what you might be up against. That getting ideas out, if something is trendy and the field's here and you're going to take the next step, that might be an easier publication. It might be easier to get that accepted than a huge paradigm shift. And sort of your weight of challenge and the weight of responsibility, if you're going to try that, is just going to be different. So if you go into it knowing that, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but if you're thinking you want to get 3 or 4 publications prior to graduation because you want to go for the tenure track, you just have to assess, okay, what am I possibly sacrificing? If I go for this paradigm shift and I'm really focused on that throughout my graduate studies and it doesn't get accepted, where does that leave me? You may decide, that's okay, I'm taking that risk, I'm going to fight the good fight, but I think the key is to go into it with the eyes wide open, know the challenge ahead of you, and accept it with the knowledge.
Yeah, this seems to me kind of, Jason, to allude to what you said earlier about working with your advisor to kind of guide around obstacles, right? This seems to fit into that category. I mean, that everyone's projects are so individuated, it's sort of hard for us, I think, to say anything in general, but that could be an obstacle that needs to be negotiated, right? Or how can I take something which is a paradigm shift and make it look more familiar or more, palatable to an established audience or whatever, right? That's because y'all do have a gatekeeper functionally, right? You're more in touch with the gatekeepers.
And absolutely, and to add just one thing from personal experience, which may be relevant to no one, when I was in graduate school, I went there because I wanted to create campaigns and efforts and interventions to increase the help received by people with depression. Whether it's getting people with depression to seek help or getting increased help to people with depression. The problem was there were no depression campaigns at the time. No one was doing this research. So what I did was I said, okay, well, there's a lot of drug campaigns out there. I'm going to learn all I can about drug campaigns and build up my credibility. There's a lot going on. Organ donation was starting off. So I did that and built up my credibility there. Then from there, about 8 years after I graduated, I finally got my first publication on increasing help seeking for people with depression. So I sort of took the route of let me build up my credibility, let me build up my skills, because that would make me stronger to break into a new domain, and it's somewhat working. Now, someone may decide, no, I'm not waiting 8 years, and I think that's where the personal choice comes in. And as long as, again, you know the challenge ahead and you lean on your advisor and get advice about that, there's nothing wrong with it, just be aware of what's ahead of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think paradigm shifts are a bit like new religious movements and Silicon Valley startups. So there's hundreds of them that arise every year or every decade, and only a few actually make it. So you do have to. Now maybe yours is going to make it, right? And so you better be awfully good and recognize that you'll be facing headwinds. So. But if you believe in it, if you think if that's it, I mean, if sometimes it happens, sometimes it works.
I'm wondering if we can shift gears a little bit, because a lot of students have told us that they were working while they were making progress on their dissertation. I'm sure a lot of you have jobs, and it's something we alluded to earlier. And one of the things they ask us is how they can manage time effectively. I'm wondering if any of you had to juggle other obligations, family, work, et cetera, through graduate school, and sort of how you manage that.
Sure.
I think you have to treat it as a job, right? And that means convincing people in your life that it's a job too, right? So, to people outside of our profession, right, they're like, oh, you're in school, isn't that cute, right? And you have to do your homework, right? And I'm not saying that you can take one, stand and then everyone's gonna believe you, right? It's gonna be a constant pushback for you, but you have to convince, whoever's in your life, right? Your partner, your roommate, your whatever, your parents, whatever it is, that this is a job that isn't going to, it's not going to be completed unless I treat it as a professional obligation, right? And that means, with your family on a weekend, for example, I need 4 hours to work. You have to negotiate, right? Because life's hard, right? And say, I need 2 hours here and 2 hours there. I cannot be interrupted. Sort of an emergency, and so you have to treat them, teach them to treat it as professional, and you have to too, right? So you can't be, you can't go against your word of say, oh, I need 4 hours, right? And then you keep, going out of your office and trying to play with the kids, right? Or, your wife or husband or, partner or whoever it is comes in and sees you on Facebook, right? You have to commit to it, and even when it's painful, right? So before I was going to go to graduate school, I was working full time, and I blocked off 3 hours every evening for 6 months to study for the GRE, and I was uncompromising in that, right? So even when people invited me to dinner, I'm like, well, I can go after that, right? And when people would be like, oh, that doesn't look fun, why don't you do this and that? And it's like, you have to create this as, it has to be like your boss is giving you a schedule and you treat it as a schedule in that way. And, you know, because you have to take it seriously for everyone else to take it seriously, and I promise you, you have to take it seriously. You know, there's going to be imperfections in this, right? So, you know, this happens to all of us. We get sick. We have sick kids, right? We have to help our parents. We have, you know, bills. We have to work. We have to do all these sort of things. And so you have to be easier on yourself on some of these things when things are not working out exactly as you planned. That's going to happen. But, you know, it's kind of like people say with a diet, right? So you have a bad, you know, a heavy meal or something, and then people tend to just be like, oh, you know, well, that's done, right? You have to, you know, what a dietitian would say is, no, each day starts afresh, right? So yesterday you didn't achieve what you wanted to achieve. Today is a different day. Today you can try to meet those obligations, and you'll feel better for it, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I think it's important to recognize what every dissertation starts with, which is an acknowledgement page. And it's usually a long laundry list of thanking all of the people that have helped you get to where you are when you defend your dissertation. And that's friends and family and partners and spouses and kids and neighbors and, you know, you name it. And so recognizing that you need the support of all of those people, and as Lissa said, it's really important that you let them know how important this is and that you need their support to get through this. I have very rarely seen people do this alone. It's definitely a village endeavor, a community endeavor, whatever you want to call it. And I also think you need to be realistic with yourself about the trade-offs. It is not possible to have this full-time job, another full-time job, take care of family, take care of sick family, and you know, volunteer 12 hours a week. There are certain limitations to you as a human being. And I would say that at least once a semester, I get a student in my office that is in meltdown because they have not been realistic about the trade-offs that this necessitates. And so you really have to look carefully at your resources and the value of your time. I think one of the things that students don't recognize is that once you make the transition from a student to a scholar, your time also becomes more important as well. And that may mean that you may need to outsource some things in your life that you can. So I have had students who say, you know, they need cleaning help, they need daycare help, they need support with transportation, and these take resources. And so you need to be realistic about what are my resources, what are the best uses of those resources, and if it is you're bringing someone in to help you with cleaning because that's the only time you have to work on your dissertation, that might be a good resource for you. Recognizing that you can't do it all. Have the perfect house, the perfect dissertation, the perfect family, the perfect life, and the perfect volunteer background is, I think, a recipe for overstress and overwork. So what are the trade-offs that you're willing to make, and what are the limitations that you have, and what are the resources that you can devote to this, and being really realistic with yourself and remembering that, as Lissa said, I also have probably at least once a semester a student dealing with an illness in the family or a life tragedy that sets them back. And that's fine, that's okay, that's normal, that happens. And this is not a race, it's a journey. And so sometimes you have to be realistic with yourself and with your network of people that support and love you, that sometimes that journey is going to take a setback. Sometimes you're going to make really quick progress, and then sometimes life is going to rear it up and say, guess what? This semester is not going to be the semester that you are going to, finish the 14 things that you had on your list. And I think, being kind with yourself and using your network of support is really important when those life setbacks hit.
Yeah, great advice, and I can't underscore enough what Melissa said. I mean, this is a job. For some of you, it can be a full-time job right now. For some of you, it can be a part-time job right now. Whatever it is, given, but this is your job. You may not be getting paid for it right now, so but this is your job, and you've got to treat it like that. You have to have the discipline that comes with that. And I will say that the challenge of finding time to write does not end for those of you who end up or want to get tenure track academic positions. It doesn't magically end at that point that you get a job. Actually, So my first year here at CGU, I came and I figured, it's a new place, so I was teaching new classes, lots of new responsibilities, all this kind of stuff. And I said, well, I'll write when I have time, right? How much writing did I get done that first year? Almost none. Because there's always something else to do. So this is not just a graduate student thing. So I learned, and in my second year, I blocked off time in my calendar, right? So this is writing time, and that was sacrosanct, other than maybe some kind of emergency or something like that. But 2 or 3 times a week for 3 or 4 hour blocks, because I can't write a half hour at a time, right? So that was blocked off. That was time that. And it was not extra time. I wasn't neglecting other things. I mean, this is what we do. We write, we research. I mean, this is what we do. And so even now as dean, I've got some writing projects, and I have to block off time. And there's always other things I could be doing, but I have to block out time and put it on my calendar.
Just basically it seems we're in agreement. If you don't block out the time, there will always be another paper to read, another student to get back to, another Facebook to check, another child to play with, another Netflix to watch. So same exact thing. If I don't block out the time, it doesn't get done. And if you say when everything else is done, I'll get to it, yeah, it's just very, very hard to ever get there.
I was going to add on top of that, I've been at this for far too long now, and now the family is finally saying, yes, please graduate, so you can do a little job, kind of thing. But I'm also teaching 5 classes with 3 preps, and I drive 3 hours a day to get to Fullerton, kind of deal. So I just to emphasize what you're saying, you have to block out the time, and don't string it along to where your family thinks that just because you're sitting at the desk at the computer, you're not working. They have to understand the limitations, because I didn't do a good job of that. And for the last 2 years, I've just kind of been floundering type of thing and not getting anything done on this side of the table kind of deal. But you have to set the boundaries with your families, and you're going to feel guilty that you don't go to your kids' tennis match that weekend or the recital or whatever. But if you do a really good job of time management, which I admittedly am not good at, I'm trying to get better at it, they have to understand that time is sink or sink. Don't interrupt dad while he's at his computer kind of thing, and that type of stuff. And that the family has to be part of it as well, and they got to support you. And don't wait for it to get to the point where they're like, would you please graduate now? We're going to leave you alone for the rest of the year, okay? So, just from my perspective.
I think maybe that segues into something that we also get asked a lot about, which is what students can do now to shorten their time to degree, sort of how to sort of move through this efficiently in a timely fashion. I don't know if you have any words of wisdom.
I think that's a place where talking to your advisor is absolutely key. Every field is different. It depends partly on what you do when you want to leave. If your goal is for some of our students, they want to get a job at the CDC, and it's not that important. They have a lot of publications or a phenomenal dissertation. So for them, hurrying along may not be bad. For other students, hurrying along might be the worst case scenario, because okay, you're done sooner, but now you're competing on the market against people who took 2 more years than you did, so they have 2 or 3 times as many publications, so you kind of hurried along just to be sitting and getting rejections. So I would really consult with your advisor, talk to them about your needs, why you have the needs to finish up on time, and really trust them. If they say, look, it'll be more hurtful than helpful for you to hurry out of here, ask them why, but have faith that they may have seen this before and they're probably looking out for your best interest.
A very similar idea that I have a lot of students that will come up to me and say, I want to be out of here in 4 years. I'm going to finish this in 4 years. The coursework in the first 2 years, I'm going to finish the dissertation in 2 years. I'm like, if that works out, that's great. But there's a lot of circumstances where that is not your best course, right? So especially if you're on a tenure track, you're competing with people with a lot of publications. I'm almost guaranteeing you that if you finish in 4 years and the first 2 years were coursework and you weren't already working with senior faculty or something like that in the first 2 years, you're not going to have publications out when you finish in 4 years. Maybe you will, and it depends from field to field. In my field, it's very unlikely that would happen. And so if you're trying, you know, if you think about your career like you do investing, and you want diversification in your portfolio, that, you know, hinging everything on the dissertation, you know, one investment, speeding that out may not be your best course, right? It may make sense to take a little time, work on this paper, and, you know, have multiple publications, have the dissertation strong, but fundamentally that depends on your own life, right? So those constraints that are outside of this program and that are going to guide that, right? So if you need to be making money right now, then speed might be of the essence. But if you can, if you have good family support, or if you're able to work on the side in a way that enables you to take more time to have more publications, these sort of things, but also maintain a reasonable lifestyle, then that can be fine. And I this is one of these imposter syndromes. As you see your friends graduate, sometimes quite earlier than you do, and you think, oh, I must be doing something wrong. It may be that you're not moving fast enough, but it also may be that you're developing a stronger portfolio for taking that time. And you also have to evaluate it, you know, can I afford it, right? You know, you have to think in those terms, right? If you're able to afford it, it might make more sense to in some sense, build a stronger portfolio and take a little bit more time.
I'm just curious how long it took each of you on your dissertation from starting to write the proposal to final sign off.
You're asking me to think back. I did mine pretty quickly. And the reason why was in part motivated because I was living in Buffalo, New York, and I was very unhappy with living in Buffalo, New York. So I did my master's and my PhD in 5 years, which was on the fast end for that program. Average would have been about 7. And part of the way I did that is I knew that I wanted to be quick from the beginning. And so my master's thesis ended up being sort of the pre-project for my dissertation proposal, which ended up being my dissertation. So I think it was probably a year from when I defended my proposal to when I defended my dissertation. And that was also aided by the fact that I was able to find a data collection site very quickly. So I also had a bit of luck in that process. I had another member of my cohort who had an organization lined up that fell through, and that set him back 2 years because he had, invested so much time. Now he was studying mergers and acquisitions. He lined up this, study in a merger situation and finding another comparable data collection site. And the same thing could have happened to me. So I recognize that there's, situational constraints as well. But I think if you really, think thoughtfully about having backup plans, so don't put all your eggs in one basket, as Lissa said, diversify your portfolio, diversify your options. You have a better chance of being more quick from a proposal to defense. But there's so much variation, so by field and by discipline.
Yeah, I was 2 years start to finish, more or less going full time. I think I was teaching one course per semester while I was doing it. But I again, kind of, this was my full-time job. Got a dissertation research grant from a national organization so that I could do summer research and got a lot done. And so it was basically 2 years start to finish.
It was, for me, 7 years from the time I started graduate school to the time I finished. My dissertation was very, very quick. It may have been under 4 months. But that was a very rare situation where I was fortunate enough to have a job lined up, and they, basically said, if you want to raise, get the PhD in hand. I had an advisor who was phenomenal and understood and said, if you get me something Friday night, you'll have it back Monday morning. I was working on grants, so I had a whole staff of people to help me with data entry. And I happened to have done a lot of research ahead of time. So I would never recommend that. I was basically tempted to just lie and be like, yeah, 2 years, 3 years. So I would never expect that, nor would I ever do that. I was drinking 80 to 100 ounces of coffee a day. I wasn't sleeping. So please, never take that route. It's not a good thing, very bad for your health, but 7 years in total.
I was about 6 years, and probably about 3 years from the defense to the, from the proposal defense to the defense of the dissertation. And again, to speak to Michelle's point about variance, right? So I work in the field of comparative politics. And comparative politics, part of the credibility in the field relies on things like field work and local knowledge. So I spent about a year of that in Argentina collecting original data and learning about the subject that I spoke about. People who do comparative politics tend to take a little longer. And also during that time, I was publishing other articles. I spent another year where I hadn't graduated, but I basically finished, where I was on a fellowship and I was teaching my own classes. That's part of developing your portfolio too, is teaching classes, right? And I was trying to, finish up other work. It was about 3 years, but it depends on the diversity. And again, I caution you to, that speed is not the only measure of success here, right? And doing things like rushing out can be harmful to you, and you have, with not just your research portfolio, but also your teaching portfolio. A lot of people that come out into academic jobs out of CGU go into teaching roles, right? And your research portfolio will be important there, but so will your teaching one. And so it may make sense to take a little more time, and so you have a rich portfolio of teaching as well. And that's not going to be fast. It can't be necessarily rushed.
Great. Well, we have just about run out of time. So I think with that, we'll say thank you to all of you for participating in this.